I'd love to introduce Dr. Young Lee Hertig because I've known her for a very long time. She's a very dear friend and has taught me so much about racism in America, not just against her own people, but all racism. She's put together some amazing conferences that have been enriching. She, of course, is very accomplished and has been a professor, and then got the real burden to start a center that would really help Asian Americans find their identity. And I especially love the fact that she has focused on women and that she has wanted women in her community who are ministers to find their rightful place, and working for that across different ethnicities, including Latino people. And so I am just so pleased that she agreed to come and speak with us this morning. And she'll say more about the work that she does, as you asked her, Steve. But I just really am very pleased and honored that she would come this morning to talk with us. Thank you, Young Lee, and we turn it over to you.
I'm privileged to address nameless and faceless victims of the Atlanta shooting. And I'd like to name what that means and what the impacts we are dealing with in our community. But I don't look like Hertig. Lee is my maiden name. I want to honor my parents, who both are gone. They were refugees from the North Korea. They left everything but with few family members to the South, but they never made it home. So when I framed them as refugees, I understood a lot of what they were doing. My dad would even borrow money to help the poor. Anybody who stand in line asking for money, he would even visit prison early in the morning in winter to release a prisoner, college student, who stole money from her roommate. And the school dean, when he visited to help her released, Mr. Lee, we have many other bright students you can help. She's a chronic liar. And my dad said, if I don't help her, nobody else would help. Next thing, we were living with her. My sister's brand new shoes, one was missing. My mom's earring, only one was missing. And my mom fed everybody, all my friends who hung out, and open house, basically. She passed on February 1st, 2018. What we are dealing with, I'd like to start today as we mark Good Friday. I don't know who the author was, but 4 years ago, I must have posted this on Facebook. Faith is seeing light with your heart when all your eyes see is darkness. Yesterday, I had a listening session with a young Canadian Korean woman, single mother, unwedded, Tyndale, University of Toronto. She's not a senior citizen, but she was assaulted with a racial slur and physical violence in Canada. And she informed me that the proud boy initially was organized in Canada. I still want to see the light in the midst of all of these because some evil isms are being manifested and it's bringing out to the surface. And I deeply appreciate Albert Einstein widen the circle. It's on the slide in my PowerPoint. We are part of the whole, which we call the universe, but it is an optical delusion of our mind that we think we are separate. This separatedness is like a prison for us. Our job is to widen the circle of our compassion so we feel connected with all people and situations. I think we've been deceived in the way we were taught as if we are all separate. I find rugged individualism one of the most challenging paradigms I noticed from the get-go when I first landed on this shore, sold to St. Paul, Minnesota, to study God myself rather than relying on a third party, all male pastors, Korean churches pulpit. I was born a questioner. I don't take things as it is. And I asked the question, why all the preachers are men? And why do they always use fake voices? And I was really tired of male-centered representation of God. When I looked around, there were more women in the church.
Youngly, if you want me to move to another slide, please always let me know. Next,
Yes.
and I'll do that. Let me know.
These questions gave me enough challenges and backlashes, but I reached the point where I needed to either abandon God or find out God from myself. And that's where I met my husband, whose last name is Hertig. I was the only Korean at Bethel Theological Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, where descendants of Scandinavians were all there as students. And God was a divine matchmaker. So I've been married happily, almost approaching 38 years, I think. This challenge, Albert Einstein was also familiar with Taoism. And this Taoism, I don't know how many of you know, but I remember talking with John Cobb during the silver anniversary. I was one of the speakers, and how there's interconnectedness between John Cobb's process theology and Lao Tzu, Taoism as a philosophy. I also talked with Rosemary Ruther when she coined the term ecofeminism. And I said, that's an English semantic problem. Because if you check out Lao Tzu's Taoism, it's so comprehensive. When you say yin, which is a feminine energy, it encompasses even the food. I want to ask you, how many of you have experienced going to Korean restaurant in K-Town, Koreatown? Do you know why they give you all those condiments so generously? It's a balancing of both yin and yang, feminine and masculine. And it's all about balancing out those. And the moon is feminine energy, sun is masculine. Somehow this integrated wholeness is missing in Western reductionistic paradigm from which I raised questions since January 1980 in St. Paul, Minnesota. Why on earth knowledge production in seminary excludes so many people? The chef is from one same culture, the menu is same. And what about all these other peoples? And that was my quest for epistemological exclusion in academy. So when I was teaching at Fuller Theological Seminary, as Grace mentioned, that's when womanist movement, muerista movement were live, and there was a real, energy there. But what do we call Asian American? And we don't even have name or name tag, and we don't even have face. So Asian American stories and Asian American knowledge and our history are absent. It's not represented. And no wonder people ask, I don't know who we are. There's no anchoring, no root. And that haunted me. When you have no root in your identity, both personal and theological, then when the going gets tough, you jump off. And why is church, Asian American church, even though we talked about feminism, womanism, and all of that, why, when you go and minister in the church, are you all so patriarchal and so masculine, and women are excluded? Those were some of the questions from which I will propose to the Louisville Institute, imagining a more equal pulpit. And that imagination today became a pastoral lab from which I'll be mentoring core team of 6 Asian American women faculty and pastors and 24 participants who are enrolled in various seminaries and who are doing ministry. So at Fuller in 1993, when I named through quantum physicist Fritjof Capra, I'm sure you all know, at Berkeley. His name is Fritjof Capra, and he had a book named The Tao of Asian American Belonging. No, The Tao of Physics. Through Fritjof Capra, I gave myself permission to require that book in my class and went to Taoism as an epistemology. So this is a brief background of where I'm coming from and knowledge generation in terms of representation of people who are missing. So just to apply this representation, when I name the name yinist, feminist, womanist, and yinist, that feminine energy, you will see the diagram in necklace, and you may see that movement of both darkness and light. That was so empowering when I named, I want to call Asian American woman's name yinist. But there were layers of internalized ism among my own people. That's ghettoizing. We don't want to be essentialized like that. It was a lonely journey, but there's a power in naming. So that naming names, there were a lot of outcry among women in my circle, Asian American women. These reporters, during the aftermath of the Atlanta shooting, they don't even reveal names of the victims. And we need to honor them by naming their names. So Xiaji 10, 49-year-old. Dao Yu Fang, 44 years old. Sunja Park, 74. Hyunjung Grant, 51. And Sun Cha Kim, 69 years old. Young Yu, 63 years old. Delana Ashley Young, 33 years old. Paul Andre Michaels, 54 years old. They were slaughtered because they are not only Asian American women objectified, and they are lower class, and they're women. And it hit my community, especially Asian American women, deep in our hearts. As LA Times reported 2 days ago, I believe it was March 31st, AAPI, hate crime and mental health crisis. There's a depression, PTSD, anxiety, a lot of triggering of their own victim experiences. So one of the things that I experience is they're lashing out in social media. So as we are speaking today, to be honest with you, am I going to be able to handle all of these backlashes coming to this pastoral lab, which we will be launching in May? Can I handle all of this? This is going to be a space where they're going to project, they're going to get triggered. So I'm asking a lot of people in my circle, please cover me with your prayers. There's just so much going on because of anxiety, depression, all triggered. So that's LA Times article. It's in the slide. So basically, as we are looking at, yes, please stay there, Grace. How are we responding to differences? How are we naming our experiences of othering and being otherized? Do we have a space to even name those? And I think one of the cultural anthropologists names our interconnectedness as a human being as you addressed reflections this morning. That this slide, 3-step multicultural hermeneutic is what I want to end with and interact with you. It's slide number, Grace, can you put up 3-step multicultural hermeneutic? I think it's number 2. Yes. I want us to think about this. everybody is in some ways like everybody, that universality of human being. Number two is everyone is in some ways like somebody. Number three, everyone is in some ways is like nobody. I resonated deeply with these three dimensions because unless you are able to connect your individual uniqueness and your cultural particularities, and then connect those particularities to universality of human being, I think we victimize other people, we essentialize them and objectify them. So I just want to give you a little background of why I think these three dimensions that we sort out is so important. So when I first landed in St. Paul, Minnesota from Seoul, everybody was curious about me. So I was making 12 different kinds of sandwiches in the school cafeteria. And Alice was my boss in the kitchen. And she would ask questions like, do you have a way in Korea that you can heat up soup in high temperature like this? And I said, yes, Alice. Do you have apple in Korea? And I said, yes. We have yellow and green, red apple in Korea. So somehow the whole burden of representing Koreans fell on my shoulder to a point I just said, you know what, Alice? We have sun and we have moon too. And she stopped asking after my comment. I think people are longing not to just be seen as you represent your culture at all times, and that's what minority people do. But if we can see people of color in their own uniqueness as well, because I don't want to be generalized, but at the same time, we share more commonality as human beings. But if we are pegged as Korean woman or Asian American woman all the time, we feel marginalized as well. So I'm just alerting to you all during this Good Friday, there's something theology of everyday life. And this is a Papua New Guinean story that my APU undergrad students brought to me about 8 years ago. And during this tragic moment, I tell my AAPI sisters and brothers, let's practice theology of coffee bean. I know he loves coffee. The daughter came to her mother in Papua New Guinea and she was crying. And so the mother grabbed her hand and said, what's going on? And she took her to the kitchen. And the mother laid out carrot, egg, and coffee, and she started boiling water in the pot. And the mother told daughter, can you put carrot in the boiling water? And she did. And when she took that out of the boiling pot, she asked, what happened to the carrot? And she said, it's all wrinkled up. And now let's put egg in the boiling pot. And what happened to the egg? Boiled egg. And now let's put coffee in the boiling pot. What happened? It changed the color of boiling water. During this moment, Jesus took all the violence in his body so that we may transform not only ourselves, but also the world, to make the world a better place. So I'm naming how there's two sides in this darkness. We can choose to see silver lining and light in the midst of this Good Friday, and the nation just distraught with series of gun violence. That's my reflection, and you can read about Eunice. I wrote it in my book, The Title of Asian American Belonging by Maryknoll sisters. I love them. Maryknoll Orbis books published. So I would love some interactions.
Thank you so much, young Lee. I'm very grateful for your comments today and the breadth and the depth of them. We're going to open up our screens a little and have some time for questions. I'll take the prerogative, young Lee, and you touched on this in different ways, but there's nothing like a personal narrative to get this across to us. Within your comfort zone, do you have examples in your own life, in your family's life, and in your friends and colleagues about acts of prejudice and anti-Asian hatred that you have been exposed to? I'm concerned in our culture today, this is somehow off the radar. It is pushed aside. It is not understood and therefore somehow accepted. So I'd be grateful, again, within what you're comfortable discussing, of how you and your family and your friends have really experienced this level of hatred and discrimination.
I think there's both overt and covert scars. I find myself when I go out and about, now that I'm vaccinated, surveying my surroundings. Because these randomness of violent attack, you are under hyper vigilant mode. So, there's an adrenaline kick because you are not relaxed. And I'm not an anxious person. I don't live my life based on fear. My mantra is gratitude and fortitude. But this impact will be permanent. Many AAPI folks will be on hyper vigilant mode when we are in public space, not knowing when somebody is going to spit at you, when they're going to attack you. And going back to this Canadian Korean story, when she called a cop response was, "What did you do to provoke racism?"
I was born.
Yeah, classic case of blaming the victim. And I think that was more painful for her than actual racial slur and racially motivated attack, physical attack. She's a petite woman. I always am mindful, even to be honest with you, when I come to a space where I don't know all of you. And that's why I said I want to dialogue more, because I didn't want to get triggered. Because in cross-cultural setting, who holds the power to interpret what I said? And I don't want to leave this space wondering how did they take what I shared? So I'm hesitant to monologue. That's why I insist I want longer time with Q&A. If there's anything to clarify, I want to know, because there's a hilarious story when it comes to a multicultural setting. My husband was a missionary to Seoul when he met me in St. Paul. Turned out that he was going to the same place, and he ate hole in the wall, according to his fellow missionaries. And he took the bus. And at that time in the 80s, the bus was so crowded, and he had shoulder bag, and he held tight onto his bag. And somebody was doing tug of war with him, trying to grab. And you couldn't see the face of this person. And so the more they tried to pull his back, the tighter he held on to. And then he went off to the office and asked local people, I cannot believe that 20% of Christian country, I experienced this thief experience before my eyes. They broke into laughter. And they said, guess what? It is our custom that people who are sitting in a crowded bus, we hold their luggage on our lap. So hospitality was translated by an outsider stealing. So the clarification and emic and etic understanding, insiders and outsiders. So that always leaves me question, even though you heard me, same thing, depending on what kind of lenses you are wearing and your social locations, you're gonna put pieces together differently. And I was a victim of that. Well, when I was younger, and when I was teaching at Fuller, and when I was speaking all white setting, especially male setting, oh my gosh, the agency determines the message, not the message itself. So I cannot do anything. Now, Chinese American women in pastoral lab, where we are enrolling people, you don't represent all Asian American, we are underrepresenting Southeast Asian. And I'm going, please, I do not claim that I, as a Korean American woman, represent all Asian American, and yet I'm naming my particularity of my social location, my limitation. You go ahead and do Southeast Asian centric hermeneutic yourself as part 2. But this is my limitation. You get the dilemma?
Yes. So this is such a forum for us. I learned a new term, yinist, today, and I see that you have written about yinist, the yinist paradigm, as early as 1998 in a scholarly piece. I think for me and others, could you expand on yinist and help us understand that better?
And there was some share screen also.
Yeah, Grace, can you put that up, bare minimum, that I put on the PowerPoint? Grace can share, right?
Yeah, she's working on it, I think.
So I think I critiqued, maybe let's go from the last slide, Grace. Overcoming Western reductionism prompted me to coin the term yinist. And Chang-Young Lee was a scholar at Drew, and his own students didn't understand him from what he was teaching. So I'm quoting him. While the West is interested in an anthropocentric approach to cosmology, East Asia is more interested in a cosmocentric approach to anthropology. In East Asia, anthropology is a part of cosmology. A human being is regarded as a microcosm of the cosmos. The inseparable relationship between humanity and the world is a distinctive characteristic of East Asian philosophy. So his book on the Trinity in Asian perspective, I highly recommend that. So together, yin yang is an inclusively interwoven both and concept rather than an either or concept. Overarching problems ensue with an imbalance of these two energies. So I don't know whether you've tried acupuncture, but Chinese medicine defines this imbalance of disease in people as well as in ecosystems. So as a philosophical paradigm, Taoism promotes a balanced and holistic practice of simple living and environmentally responsible stewardships. So this is the background. So I'm naming, and then if we can move on to slide 6. So I tweaked from Changyang Lee's idea of connecting Taoism as a cosmology. And the female energy is comprehensive because it encompasses gender, ecology, and health, even the food. You can come up with a food chart. Carl Gustav Jung was influenced by Lao Tzu, Taoism, when he drew all the archetypes. And it turns out that Einstein and Carl Jung, there was a German scholar who had dinner party in Zurich, early 1900. So they were pretty familiar with yin and yang concept and both and, as Einstein developed relative theory. So the reason why, let me just go a little bit further in terms of definition. The yin is holistic, dynamic, synthesizing, and complementary with yang. Do you notice that in the midst of white space, there's also darkness? In the darkness, there's also light. So unlike feminist feminism, yinist, when you say yin, yang is already in the background. It's a duality. So you are not alienating men because you are claiming feminism. Man and woman, feminine and masculine energy working in harmony. And that's what this wholeness and integrated wholeness refers to. So I don't want to, just because I, as a woman and woman of color, felt alienation and otherization doesn't mean that I have to alienate men. I'm deeply committed to increasing the number of male allyship and co-conspiratorship. It's man's problem after all, my mentor said, Mennonite Paul Hebert. So what good is it when only women are talking this issue? So we need to bring men to our space and talk together. So it diffuses false sense of dichotomies derived from the dualistic paradigm of male against female, human being against nature, God apart from human being, and this world apart from another world. So I'm an environmentalist. I do planetary theology. And as a yinist, I don't know what, if you haven't watched Zero Impact Man, I highly recommend that you read it. And the story of stuff, we don't have 6 planets. So in this lab that I'm creating, which will be rolled out in May, I'll be, emphasizing how much carbon footprint do you produce? What's your responsibility? How are you going to change your life? We're not going to just talk about concept. I'm after behavioral change as well, as we come together as a team, that let's experiment and let's calculate how much carbon I'm, contributing daily. What is it that I can change so that we can sustain and have sustainable future for younger generation? I love Generation Z. So, the minute you say yang is in the background, the minute you say yang, yin is in the background. So I presented this when I left Fuller, and they asked me to address this. And then President Rich Mao goes during the Q&A, why not Yangist? Rich, Yang is already overrepresented and dominant. For us to be healthy, you've got to have yin. So the whole notion of disease and definition of disease in Chinese medicine is when one organ dominates, when there's no homeostasis, and each part functioning, which I draw, I think 1 Corinthians 12, when Paul said the church is body of Christ, and then him giving affirmative action with a weaker part, we need to pay special attention because woman has been oppressed. That's why I'm naming a yinist. If male species have been oppressed, I would call it a yangist. But we are not there yet.
Yes.
It's complicated.
We're beginning to get questions. So I see first Robert Link and then Carol Francis.
Hello, Dr. Lee, Reverend Lee. First, thanks for being here. Just thrilled. And the conversation that I anticipated has been touched by a spiritual element that I really didn't expect today, and I'm just delighted. I'm a minor student of Taoism, a little bit of the I Ching. And at this moment, I'd like everyone to just, on Good Friday, hold a memory of Paul Sawyer. It's one of the reasons I continue to follow my Asian studies. A lot of what you say strikes me as familiar from Merton's Chuang Tzu. Are you familiar with Thomas Merton's version of Chuang Tzu's Taoism? If not, I highly recommend it. So readable, so wonderful, and you will hear the same echoes again and again.
Are you talking about Chuang Tzu?
Yes.
Yes.
My pronunciation's horrible. Sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I guess the question that I had was, are you familiar with the intercultural studies works of A.T. Hall? The books, The Silent Language, The Hidden Dimension, The Dance of Time. And if not, you are?
Silent Language, yes.
Yay. Yay, okay, that's all I need. Thank you. For those who don't know, two of your participants today have read and recommend for intercultural studies the works of E.T. Hall. Probably the one. Which one would you recommend folks start with, Reverend Hertig?
I think easy way for folks to go to Taoism as cosmology, I would like to recommend Fritjof Capra's book, The Power of Physics. From quantum physics perspective, they were struggling and depressed, all the quantum physicists, when they discover light is both particle and wave. In the Western paradigm, they could not settle that both end phenomenon that they just observed and discovered. So physicists were depressed. And then they turned to Lao Tzu's both and concept. Wow, then we have language to describe this. So, you know, if you're not as familiar, I would recommend Capra first, Tao of Physics. And from there, I mean, he's written numerous books, Turning Point, and you name it. And then you can ease your way to I Ching and Tao concept, which is so foreign to Western black and white either or paradigm.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Robert, if you're inclined to put any of your references in the chat, the books you've mentioned and the authors, that would be helpful to everybody. Now we've got questions coming in from Carol Francis, Anthony, and Dr. Ruby.
May I insert one more?
Yes, please.
Resource. I compared Taoism with Irish, what is Celtic spirituality in my book. There's enormous correspondence and parallel between Celtic Druid spirit and Lao Tzu. They might have met through Silk Road.
Thank you. Carol Francis.
Yeah, thank you. I've been long fascinated by yin yang. And I'm wondering if you can make it even more clear to us to like describe a situation in which either hypothetical or one that you know of, in which a feminist and a yinist look at the same situation and do something different, react to it in a different way.
So let me go answer that through womanist and why womanist arose. So to the feminist, Black sisters are saying, you all ask us to come and burn bra and you name it, but you are not addressing racism issue. It's just a gender, you know, equality issue. So yes, we agree with you and we identify with you, but we need to address a gender issue. So they created womanist term. Alice Walker, Color Purple was a prompt. And Ave Maria at Drew coined the term muerista. So Latina sisters are going to feminist group in American Academy of Religion, and then womanist and Latina sisters are saying, hey, yes and no, because you're talking about gender and race, but you're not talking about immigration. So we are muerista. So I'm going all of those tribes. Still, Asian Americans are nameless and faceless. So I've got to have a name badge, otherwise you get submerged. So yinist, and you can read about it in my book. Little commercial there.
Good. Did that address your point, Carol Francis? Good. So now we've got Anthony and Dr. Ruby.
I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you for this excellent presentation that I hadn't expected so much about Taoism, which has deeply influenced me as a Quaker. When I first became a Quaker, my mentor was Herman Maurer, and he translated the Tao Te Ching with a commentary based on Quaker writings, the Bible, and Martin Buber's Hasidic Judaism.
Oh, yes.
And there's a really interesting connection because Martin Buber was fascinated with Changsu.
Oh.
Where, in fact, there's a book about Martin Buber called I and Tao.
Yes, yes. THOU.
What Herman Maurer did was show connections between the Bible, Quaker writings, and Hasidic Judaism in his commentary. It's a very unique and very little known translation of the Tao Te Ching, but it had a profound influence on me.
Can you please put that on the chat?
I will. I will. And I just wanted to say that as an activist, I think Taoism has helped me to recognize the importance of balance between the male and the female, and the, and also not to fall into the trap of male dominant thinking as I do my activism. And as a Quaker, I've benefited from being having women leaders very prominent in my religious movement. And so I'm grateful for that balance that I think is essential to the work we do as activists. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because we need each other, East and West, men and women,
Yes.
light and
Amen.
dark, all of this. Yeah. And I'll put the connection with Herman Maurer in
Yes,
the chat.
please do on the chat. Let your life speak, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Terrific. Any thoughts in response to Anthony Younglee?
I resonated deeply with Martin Buber's I and thou concept as opposed to I and it. And if I can draw back to AAPI community and all this feminism, I have noticed let's out men sometimes in a reactionary activism moment. I'm seeing in social media all of a sudden all these Asian American male clergy jumping on the racism bandwagon. And I'm thinking, you haven't named your own sin, which is sexism in your church. So, you own your own dark side first before you point fingers at others. So if I may illustrate one more point on Taoism, I'm discerning beautifully, religiously every day. Is this my time to move forward or retreat? Retreat is not bad. You cannot always be on. And I'm afraid some of the people who are speaking out, you need to shut up, is what I want to say. So this is illustration from Japan that really highlights the concept of wu-wei. Wu-wei is non-action, and non-action is not passive. Two men in Japanese marketplace had an argument one day, and they couldn't settle their differences. So the man opponent proposed sword matching a week from now. So the respondent said, yes, let's have a sword match a week later at this place. Little that he knew, the guy who proposed a sword match to settle the difference was the best warrior's son of the day. And this guy has never even touched the sword. So he struggled and he said, if I sign up how to use sword one-on-one in a week, I wouldn't master. I'll be slaughtered. So he went to the Buddhist monk and he asked, can you help me to die with dignity? I know I'll be slaughtered, but I want to be slaughtered with some dignity. Buddhist monk asked 3 times. 3 is the ultimate reality. Are you ready to die? Yes, but let me die with some dignity. And he answered 3 times. And the monk said, this is how you do. You show up to the marketplace 10 minutes before your opponent arrives. Get yourself a sword and stand there with your eyes closed and hold your sword up way high with your eyes closed. When you feel the sword piercing from your side or front, you just put your sword down. And so his opponent arrived 10 minutes later, and he saw a man whose energy he emitted was like, I'm ready to die. Like, if I perish, I perish, Book of Esther. So the opponent canceled the match. I am contemplating a lot in my life after mistakes I've made. I've got to speak. I've got to speak up. But there's a virtue sometimes in being silent. Is this time for me to speak? Or is this time for me to listen and shut up? And do I have inner space from which I can speak healthy rather than lashing out? And my regret, I'm seeing my people lashing out without owning their own dark sides. Sexism is as toxic as racism, and classism is so prevalent in Asian American churches. So I'm hoping that we don't reduce this complex phenomenon through the Atlanta shooting, that Asian American elites only talk amongst their circle. These are shunned people that even church don't welcome. So, what I meant by intersectional perspective was there's a racism, sexism, classism in this Atlanta shooting. And what are you going to do about it? So I'm organizing a panel later at the end of this month. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Ruby and then Bonnie Bluestein.
Thank you for bringing all that you've had to bring regarding the Asian community. In the 70s, I graduated from a religious university, Loyola, and we had to study religion. And before then, if you had, the skin and the eyes and stuff, you were all the same. And so I was able to study the differences in the religions and also the differences in the nationalities there and all of the things that go along with that. And so, and it's so interesting because we have some of the same problems when you were talking about the men in the ministries.
Mm-hmm.
And also, and I always thought of Asian women as being strong, physically. I would try to, I took karate and everything, because I was watching, like now as a senior, I see the Asians being able to stoop and squat and I can't bend my knees, So I've always thought of the Asian as a strong people. But I found out too, it was the foods, it was the work and everything. And I just want to let you know that I respect you and where you are.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to let you know that. And thank you for bringing out everything you have about women, because it's not just Black women or Asian women or white women, it's all women. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Bonnie and Jasmine next.
Thank you. This is such a rich discussion that there are about 4 different points that I would love to jump in on at this point, but I feel like I have to choose one. But let me say that I really appreciate your bringing up the class question and the kind of work that these were women workers and the kind of work that they were doing, and because almost nobody is talking about that at all. And I think that's important. I don't want to divert this whole discussion, but this is something that's sort of weighing on me. So when people talk about the anti-Asian racism, all the fingers are getting pointed at Mr. Trump and his obvious China bashing. And meanwhile, I'm watching Joe Biden talk about America's eating our lunch. and his policy, Blinken, you know, going to this meeting with Alaska and talking tough to China. And there's this wave that I guess this trend that's goes way beyond Trump that sort of says China's a rising power. The United States is going to have to fight China, and it's demonizing China, I think, in much the way that Japan and Japanese people were demonized around World War II. And I think that it's our obligation as an organization dedicated to justice and peace to call out the anti-China pro-war propaganda on it. And I just sort of wanted to say that to my peeps here. So maybe I'll just sort of leave it at that, except to say that I'm also always troubled by the idea, the tension of lumping together people from everywhere from Korea to Iraq by way of Sri Lanka as Asian. And on the one hand, that may be a way to create solidarity, which could be useful, but another way, it seems like a sort of erasure. So I don't know whether you would want to comment on either of those things.
I appreciate John Cobb's work, relying on Whitehead and that whole process theology, because solidarity is not an outcome. It is a process. And sometimes that process is flooded with tensions and conflicts and projections, but are we able to hold that space of conflict and tension? I'm dealing with the core woman faculties, Asian American faculty, who even in their naming of Asian American hermeneutics, that's our collective field-based Asian American hermeneutic, not just cerebral. Their way of thinking is so white, they don't know Asian paradigm. They are very white, more white than white folks. It's an oxymoron. So they come with an entitlement and expectation that this has to be a very, smooth and surfacey. And I'm trying to get them to name what tension, what they are bringing. Let's name conflict and tension. So peace is an ugly process. And I think what Biden is talking about is addressing slaughtering Muslim Chinese. So many are being killed under Trump's giving blind eyes. So in a way, naming that. But then unless America does something about this random mass shooting, we have no credibility to come in and say, police, you've got to be democratic, adopt democracy. Democracy is really smashed in the last 4 years. So we are on recovery, and the world wants America to model democracy. And there has to be a collective nation's voices so that we spare human species from fascist countries. I don't know whether I made sense to you.
You did. Thank you. We have Jasmine next. And Stephen, I see.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Young, for
Jasmine?
Presentation, and showed the plenty of religion.
Jasmine, I need to interrupt you. Jasmine, I would ask you,
Yes.
we cannot hear you clearly.
Yes.
Can you call in on your cell phone so that your question can be understood by us and by our speaker?
Or she can chat.
Or you chat your question, Jasmine. I'm so sorry, your audio just is broken up so much that we cannot understand it.
Or she can turn off her video.
And you can use the chat for your question. People are saying if you turn off your video, it may enhance your audio signal.
Yes.
Yeah, that's an echo of
Okay.
Jasmine, can you put your question in the chat? We're so sorry because somehow now your audio doesn't work either. We can't understand anything. Could you put your question in the chat and then Lee Hertig can answer there? She can speak to your question and you can hear her, but we just need the question. Okay, good.
Yeah, I didn't miss it. It's okay. Okay. It's okay.
There it is. It's in the chat. How can we get more Black young women to respect I'll say AAPI, women and people?
You know, that's why I created in 2014 Black and Asian American faith leaders with Chip Marie. And your question is right. We are so siloed and we don't have a space that we cross gender and ethnicity and race. So to my surprise, he also confirmed. He calls me young blood, Chip Marie. He said, you know what? This is the first time in LA, Black faith leaders and Asian American faith leaders got together. And he didn't even take it to Korean restaurant before, even though USC is neighboring location. So I took him out to Korean restaurant and he started looking around and what do you people eat? You all stay thin. And I said, it's a power of tea. So yes, by the way, I was schooled by amazing Black preachers in Dayton, Ohio, during their Doctor of Ministry intensive, you know, Cornel West, Bishop Vashti, Mackenzie Vashti. I mean, Jasmine, there are so many amazing Black preachers. So one of my plan is to invite Black prophetic preachers to help Asian American women and men to preach like the way Black folks preach, not in the style, but I just devoured when Mackenzie Vashti, Bishop Vashti preached from John 4. We were all dancing in the aisle. I mean, you folks are so rich in the way you approach the Bible. And that's what I'm trying to bring to my community.
Thank you so much. We're beginning, Stephen Fisk, please. You're on mute, Stephen.
Right. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's very, very wonderful and appreciated. The first word of our organization, Interfaith, I think is connected to everything that you've been talking about in terms of inclusivity, in terms of respecting diversity and respecting differences and building bridges across differences. So perhaps you could elaborate a little more on the connectivity of the interfaith movement, which I think is really critical in the West, in the merging of East and West.
And I want to highlight that universality of humanity. And when we divide our differences, whether it's religion, race, and gender, at the end of the day, if we do not connect the dots and understand, even just discovering unbelievable overlap between Druids, worldview with Celtic, and then to Lao Tzu, Taoism. Believe me, my people don't know that. So without denigrating particularities of religion, if we create a space where we name our particularity, whether that's gender, race, class, religion, and finding common ground without reducing our differences. So I thrived with the National Council of Churches, Faith and Order. I've gotten to know many different brands of Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. Oh my goodness, it was just such a feast. And yet they didn't have racial diversity. So I turned to, wining hour, WINE, wine and cheese hour, into ecumenism from the margins, and invited, when we met in Oklahoma, I invited Cherokee descendants who drove 120 miles, and we put them on. And who said the Trail of Tears is past history? When they drove, we saw the impact of eating government fried bread. They were enormous, malnourished. And this Methodist Cherokee pastor taught us something these bishops, you name it, have never heard of. But that was a lot of work. So I don't think we have that kind of space. Your space is very rare. And thank you for all of your leadership over the many years. George Rigas, and I'm a closet All Saints, member, but I'm PCUSA. I resonate more with, United Methodist and Anglican, and, because of the commonality with Lao Tzu and Taoism, I'm more inclined towards Quaker, Anglican, and you name it. So I think as long as we make it a habit, going further than naming our uniqueness and particularity to connecting the human universality and commonality. Just because I look like this doesn't mean that, I'm the other in this room. But I'm naming, until you understand my particularity as an individual and my people and as a human being, I wouldn't feel like you understand me. And so don't essentialize me. And then don't put, my identity is not just Asian or woman. I bring my history and my memories that's interrelated with my background, social, cultural location, but I'm also a very unique human being. So if you tell me you're trying to understand me, yes, start with my social location, individual level, my ethnic level, but I critiqued before. When I was little, even 5-year-old, I was a troublemaker. I questioned Korean language structure. This language puts you in a box that you have to always think hierarchically. So I raised that question. I raised question, why do I have to bow 90 degrees when, guests come when I don't feel like doing it? It, comes across very hypocritical. And then I come here and I critique American culture. But I don't want to just say neither nor, but let's connect the dots. But at the end of the day, us as a human being on this planet, which might evict us if we don't change, we share more commonality. Let's both end.